Demian. Prologue. I wanted only to try to live in accord with the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? I cannot tell my story without reaching a long way back. If it were possible, I would reach back farther still, into the very first years of my childhood, and beyond them, into distant ancestral past. Novelists, when they write novels, tend to take an almost godlike attitude toward their subject, pretending to a total comprehension of the story, a man's life, which they can therefore recount as God himself might, nothing standing between them and the naked truth, the entire story, meaningful in every detail. I am as little able to do this as the novelist is, even though my story is more important to me than any novelist's is to him. For this is my story. It is the story of a man, not of an invented, or possible, or idealized, or otherwise absent figure, but of a unique being of flesh and blood. Yet, what a real living human being is made of seems to be less understood today than at any time before, and men, each one of whom represents a unique and valuable experiment on the part of nature, are therefore shot wholesale nowadays. If we were not something more than unique human beings, if each one of us could really be done away with once and for all by a single bullet, storytelling would lose all purpose. But every man is more than just himself. He also represents the unique, the very special, and always significant and remarkable point at which the world's phenomena intersect, only once in this way and never again. That is why every man's story is important, eternal, sacred. That is why every man, as long as he lives and fulfills the will of nature, is wondrous and worthy of every consideration. In each individual the spirit has become flesh. In each man the creation suffers. Within each one a redeemer is nailed to the cross. Few people nowadays know what man is. Many sense this ignorance and die the more easily because of it, the same way that I will die more easily once I have completed this story. I do not consider myself less ignorant than most people. I have been, and still am, a seeker, but I have ceased to question stars and books. I have begun to listen to the teachings my blood whispers to me. My story is not a pleasant one. It is neither sweet nor harmonious, as invented stories are. It has the taste of nonsense and chaos, of madness and dreams, like the lives of all men who stop deceiving themselves. Each man's life represents a road toward himself, an attempt at such a road, the intimation of a path. No man has ever been entirely and completely himself, yet each one strives to become that, one in an awkward, the other in a more intelligent way, each as best he can. Each man carries the vestiges of his birth, the slime and eggshells of his primeval past, with him to the end of his days. Some never become human, remaining frog, lizard, ant. Some are human above the waist, fish below. Each represents a gamble on the part of nature in creation of the human. We all share the same origin, our mothers. All of us come in at the same door. But each of us, experiments of the depths, strives toward his own destiny. We can understand one another, but each of us is able to interpret himself to himself alone. 1. 2 realms. I shall begin my story with an experience I had when I was 10 and attended our small town's Latin school. The sweetness of many things from that time still stirs and touches me with melancholy. Dark and well-lighted alleys, houses and towers, chimes and faces, rooms rich and comfortable, warm and relaxed, rooms pregnant with secrets. Everything bears the scent of warm intimacy, servant girls, household remedies, and dried fruits. The realms of day and night, 2 different worlds coming from 2 opposite poles, mingled during this time. My parents' house made up one realm, yet its boundaries were even narrower, actually embracing only my parents themselves. This realm was familiar to me in almost every way: mother and father, love and strictness, model behavior, and school. It was a realm of brill, liance, clarity, and cleanliness, gentle conversations, washed hands, clean clothes, and good manners. This was the world in which morning hymns were sung and Christmas celebrated. Straight lines and paths led into the future. There were duty and guilt, bad conscience and confession, forgiveness and good resolutions, love, reverence, wisdom, and the words of the Bible. If one wanted an unsullied and orderly life, one made sure one was in league with this world. The other realm, however, overlapping half our house, was completely different. It smelled different, spoke a different language, promised and demanded different things. This second world contained servant girls and workmen, ghost stories, rumors of scandal. It was dominated by a loud mixture of horrendous, intriguing, frightful, mysterious things, including slaughterhouses and prisons, drunkards and screeching fishwives, carving cows, horses sinking to their death, tales of robberies, murders, and suicides. All these wild and cruel, attractive and hideous things surrounded us, could be found in the next alley, the next house. Policemen and tramps, drunkards who beat their wives, droves of young girls pouring out of factories at night, old women who put the hex on you so that you fell ill, thieves hiding in the forest, arsonists nabbed by country police. Everywhere this second vigorous world erupted and gave off its scent, everywhere, that is, except in our parents' rooms. And that was good. It was wonderful that peace and orderliness, quiet and a good conscience, forgiveness and love, ruled in this one realm, and it was wonderful that the rest existed too. The multitude of harsh noises, of sullenness and violence, from which one could still escape with a leap into one's mother's lap. It was strange how both realms bordered on each other, how close together they were. For example, when Lena, our servant girl, sat with us by the living room door at evening prayers and added her clear voice to the hymn, her washed hands folded on her smoothed-down apron, she belonged with father and mother, to us, to those that dwelled in light and righteousness. But afterwards, in the kitchen or woodshed, when she told me the story of the tiny man with no head, or when she argued with neighborhood women in the butcher shop, she was someone else, belonged to another world, which veiled her with mystery. And that's how it was with everything, most of all with myself. Unquestionably, I belonged to the realm of light and righteousness. I was my parents' child. But in whichever direction I turned, I perceived the other world, and I lived within that other world as well, though often a stranger to it, and suffering from panic and a bad conscience. There were times when I actually preferred living in the forbidden realm, and frequently, returning to the realm of light necessary and good as it may have been, seemed almost like returning to something less beautiful, something rather drab and tedious. Sometimes I was absolutely certain that my destiny was to become like mother and father, as clear-sighted and unspoiled, as orderly and superior as they. But this goal seemed far away, and to reach it meant attending endless schools, studying, passing tests and examinations, and this way led past and through the other, darker realm. It was not at all impossible that one might remain a part of it and sink into it. There were stories of sons who had gone astray, stories read with passion. These stories always pictured the homecoming as such a relief, and as something so extraordinary that I felt convinced that this alone was the right, the best, the sought-for thing. Still, the part of the story set among the evil and the lost was more appealing by far, and if I could have admitted it, at times I didn't want the prodigal son to repent and be found again. But one didn't dare think this, much less say it out loud. It was only present somehow as a premonition, a possibility at the root of one's consciousness. When I pictured the devil to myself, I could easily imagine him on the street below, disguised or undisguised, or at the country fair or in a bar, but never at home with us. My sisters, too, belonged to the realm of light. It often seemed to me that they had a greater natural affinity to my father and mother. They were better mannered, had fewer faults than I. They had their faults, of course. They had their bad moments, But these did not appear to go very deep as they did with me, whose contact with evil often grew so oppressive and painful, and to whom the dark world seemed so much closer. Sisters, like parents, were to be comforted and respected. If I had quarrelled with them, I always reproached myself afterwards, felt like the instigator, the one who had to ask for forgiveness. For by offending my sisters, I offended my parents, all that was good and superior. There were secrets I would far rather have shared with the lowest hoodlum than with my sisters. On good days, when my conscience did not trouble me, it was often delightful to play with them, to be good and decent as they were, and to see myself in a noble light. That's what it must have been like to be an angel. It was the highest state one could think of. But how infrequent such days were. Often at play, at some harmless activity, I became so fervent and headstrong that I was too much for my sisters. The quarrels and unhappiness this led to threw me into such a rage that I became horrible, did and said things so awful they seared my heart even as I said them. Then followed harsh hours of gloomy regret and contrition, the painful moment when I begged forgiveness, to be followed again by beams of light, a quiet, thankful, undivided gladness. I attended the Latin school. The mayor's son and the head forester's son were in my class. Both visited me at home at times, and though they were quite unruly, they were both members of the good, the legal world. Yet this did not mean that I had no dealings with some of the neighborhood boys who attended public school, and on whom we usually looked down. It is with one of them that I must begin my story. One half-holiday, I was little more than 10 years old. 2 neighborhood kids and I were roaming about when a much bigger boy, a strong and burly kid from public school, the tailor's son, joined us. His father drank, and the whole family had a bad name. I had heard much about Franz Kromer, was afraid of him, didn't at all like that he came up to us. His manners were already those of a man, and he imitated the walk and speech of young factory workers. Under his leadership, we clambered down the riverbank by the bridge and hid below the first arch. The narrow strip between the vaulted wall of the bridge and the lazily flowing river was covered with nothing but refuse, shards, tangled bundles of rusty wire, and other rubbish. Occasionally one could pick up something useful here. Franz Kromer instructed us to comb the area and show him what we found. He would either pocket it or fling it into the river. He put us on the lookout for objects made of lead, brass, and tin, all of which he tucked away, also an old comb made of horn. I felt very uneasy in his presence, not only because I knew that my father would not have approved of my being seen in his company, but because I was simply afraid of Franz himself, though I was glad that he seemed to accept me and treat me like the others. He gave instructions and we obeyed. It seemed like an old habit, even though this was the first time I was with him. After a while we sat down. Franz spit into the water, and he looked like a man. He spit through a gap between his teeth and hit whatever he aimed at. A conversation started up, and the boys began boasting and heaping praise on themselves for all sorts of schoolboy heroics and tricks they had played. I kept quiet, and yet was afraid I'd be noticed, that my silence might particularly incur Kromer's wrath. My 2 friends had begun to shun me the very moment Franz Kromer had joined us. I was a stranger among them, and felt that my manners and clothes presented a kind of challenge. As a Latin schoolboy, the spoiled son of a well-to-do father, it would be impossible for Franz to like me, and the other 2, I felt acutely, would soon disown and desert me. Finally, out of sheer nervousness, I began telling a story too. I invented a long tale about a robbery in which I filled the role of hero. In a garden near the mill, I said, together with a friend, I had stolen a whole sackful of apples one night, and by no means ordinary apples, but apples of the very best sort. It was the fear of the moment that made me seek refuge in this story. Inventing and telling stories came naturally to me. In order not to fall immediately silent again, and perhaps,